Okay, the reading for this week is a anthology, a collection of poems, 82 poems in all, by the 3rd century Chinese poet Ruan. And you will remember that one of the early assignments that we did this semester was Ishikawa Jun's debut work, Kajing, which I translated as The Fair One. And you'll remember that in that work, the narrator kind of comically compares himself to the 3rd century eccentric neo-Taoist poet Ruan. And at one point in the poem, he cites poem 80 from this collection that I'm now about to read. And that citation, that quotation that he cites in the middle of the work, includes the word Kajing that became the title of that work. And we will now read that entire collection. And the original title is Yonghuai, and it's translated into English by the great translator and scholar of Tang Dynasty poetry, Stephen Owen. And he translates the collection as Singing My Cares. And I initially thought I would intersperse some commentary as I read, but that would take way too long to do it. I want to get through the entire collection in this single video. So I will make this video solely a recitation video, and in the next video I will make a study guide for this work, and we will talk about the author, his historical context, the literary context, the influence of Taoism, and so forth. And also note that in this translation that you will have, it's available online, I should mention, and it's Stephen Owen published a translation in 2007, and the book is called The Poetry of Ruan and Xi Kang, and it includes this work, the Yonghuai, and it was published by De Gruyter in 2017, and De Gruyter, the publishing company, has kindly made the entire work available online. So I'll provide in the description a link to that, to the entire work, so you can read along. And Owen includes both his English translation as well as the original Chinese, so we can read both simultaneously. You will note that my Chinese is very, very rusty. I haven't studied formally Chinese in about a decade, so my pronunciation, I will do my best to pronounce the words as they are pronounced in Chinese, but again, this is classical Chinese, so the pronunciations in the late Han Dynasty and early Wei Kingdom period are of course different than they are now, and also I'm not very familiar with the tones, so I might screw up many of the tones, so you will forgive me as I read. Do my best to recite this work. And also note that Ruan, of course, is one of the great, a well-known member of the 7 Sages of the Bamboo Grove. The 7 Sages of the Bamboo Grove is a famous group of poets from the 3rd century. Chinese word is Zhu Ling Qi Xiang, a group of neo-Taoist scholars, writers, and musicians. And many of them sort of got together and left society or rejected society and sought to pursue more spiritual or metaphysical pursuits, and drinking lots of wine too, of course. Alright, so keep in mind that Ruan is one of the 7 sages of the Bamboo Grove, and is therefore one of the great poets of classical Chinese literature. Alright, I'm going to read the poem now, starting with 1. Again, there are 82 poems in all. I'll try to get through all of these as quickly as possible. Alright. Singing My Cares, the 5-syllable line poems. Okay, so keep in mind that these poems are pentasyllabic poems, so there's 5 kanji, 5 hanzi in each line. Okay, and of course you can't replicate that in English, so the English lines have various numbers of words, various numbers of letters, but the original Chinese all have 5 kanji per line. Keep that in mind. Okay. Starting with poem 1. Okay, I'll say the number of each poem before I read it. I could not get to sleep last night. It begins. I sat up... Oh, gotta fix the scroll here. I sat up and plucked my zither. The thin curtain gave the image of the bright moon. A cool breeze blew on the folds of my robes. A lone swan cried out in the wilds. Winging birds sang in the woods to the north. I paced about. What might I see? Anxious thoughts wounded my heart alone. Poem 2. Who says everything is troublesome? One may spend all one's day roaming free. Okay, well, note that one of the major themes of this entire collection is this desire to be free, this desire to pursue what one wants to pursue, rather than the duties and responsibilities that society thrusts on you. So throughout it, he's pursuing freedom. He's also pursuing this sort of enigmatic, ephemeral object of his desire. It doesn't really say what it is. It might be a female beauty, and at other times it might be this great Junzi ideal of the figure of the ideal male figure. Alright, so we'll confirm these as we go along, and we'll discuss all this stuff later in the study guide when we talk about the themes of this collection. Poem 2. Who says everything is troublesome? One may spend all one's days roaming free. Looking out from my hall, I am screened by flowering trees. On and on, I brood on formlessness. And there's a note about formlessness here. This is a Taoist idea of formlessness rather than Buddhist. Keep in mind that there aren't many, as far as I can tell, not many Buddhist influences in this work, but there are many, many Taoist influences. So the formlessness here refers to, and there are several allusions and echoes and quotations, citations of the two major texts of Taoism, foundational texts about Taoism, the Zhuangzi and the Lao Tzu. Okay, so there are many notes about that. We'll confirm all that stuff later. I brood on formlessness. As I pace about, I think of kin and friends, and all of a sudden it is dark again. To send word by the bird flying east would comfort how I feel. And then the original Chinese is provided. And keep in mind that all of the allusions and citations and echoes from classic are mainly from previous works of poetry and historical figures, and the four books and the five, what's it called in English? Let me see. Hold on one second. The 4 books and the 5 classics and so forth. And note that most of the references and allusions are not to Duanzhi's own contemporary historical setting or the political context in which he lived. It was probably dangerous to refer directly to that political and social and historical context, since it was an era of great tumult and instability and war and so forth. So most of the references are to things in the distant past. Keep that in mind as we read. Okay, poem 3 now. Poem 3. The finest time is this morning now, with falling rain sprinkling down the dust. By the road I gaze toward the one I long for, underlined up, toward the one I long for, who by evening still has not come. So this ideal figure that he's waiting for, longing for, it has not come. Right, so this theme that runs throughout of unfulfilled desire. Right, the desire that the speaker of these poems feels is very rarely, if ever, fulfilled. Keep that in mind. Human feelings are sometimes moved strongly, tossed along. How can we dispel them? Wiping away tears, I harbor misery and pain. To whom can I speak this bitterness? Okay, great suffering and misery are also the major moods of this work. Poem number 4, 2 nymphs. Okay, nymphs are obviously objects of sexual desire. 2 nymphs roamed by the river's shore. And there's a footnote about this. These 2 nymphs are the nymphs of a classical work that the readers of the time would have been familiar with. 2 nymphs roamed by the river's shore. Carefree, they soared along with the wind. Zheng Jiaofe put their pendant rings in his bosom. Their youthful beauty lent a sweet scent. With tender feelings he felt love for them. For 1,000 years he would not forget them. A city toppler beguiled Xia Cai. There's a note. City toppler here is a reference to a beautiful woman who is so beautiful that she topples cities. And this city toppler beguiled Xie Cai. Fairness of face ties the heart up within. And next we have poem... continuing the same poem. Being so stirred brings troubled thoughts. The herb of forgetting is planted in the eupatorium chamber. For whom is hair oil applied? Hope for rain brings reproach for the dawn's light. How can a bond firm as metal and stone change in one morning to separation's pain? Poem 5. A path forms beneath fine trees, peach and plum in the eastern garden. Then autumn wind blows the bean leaves flying. From this point the shedding and falling begin. Thick flowering has its time to become bedraggled. Thorny briars grow in the hall. I galloped my horse and left it, abandoning it. I left and went up the base of West Mountain. I am unable to take care of my own person. How much less can I dote on wife and children? Stiff frost blankets the plants in the wilds, and the year's twilight is done. Okay, so the passage of time is another major theme in this collection. Nothing lasts very long in the world of Don Zhi, and in his own sort of poetic sensibility, this idea of impermanence is very central to his thoughts and works. Poem number 6. The horses of heaven are from the northwest. Okay, a note about the Tenma, Tianma. They have always followed the road eastward. Springs and autumns have no place to stay lodged. How can wealth and honor be kept forever? Again, nothing lasts, especially wealth and honor. The clear dew blankets the marsh eupatorium. Stiff frost soaks the plants in the wilds. At dawn I was a handsome youth. By sundown I have become ugly and old. Again, the immediate, instantaneous passage of time from youth to old age, right? Unless one is Prince Qing, who can always be fine and fair. Number 7. As I used to be a young man, flighty and light-hearted, I loved songs sung to strings. I roamed west to Xianyang and frequented the Zhaos and Lis. In the original poems, before my pleasures had been enjoyed to the fullest, the bright sun suddenly slipped away. Okay, so before he had achieved satiety with all of his desires and so forth, before he had fulfilled them, time moved and he suddenly became old and was unable to fulfill his desires, and now he is an old man, he's saying. Before my pleasure had enjoyed to the fullest, the bright sun suddenly slipped away. I galloped my horse to go back home, then turned to gaze at the Three Rivers region. 100 pounds of gold were gone. The expenses were always terribly great. Looking north on road through the Taihang range, what shall I do if I lose my way? Okay. Fear of getting lost, too, appears through this several times. Appears in this as a recurring motif. Number 8. I have heard of Dongling's melons long ago. They were close outside Green Gate. Stretching to field boundaries, they reached the paths. Mothers and infants strung one to another. Multicolored, gleaming in the dawn sun, fine visitors converged from all around. An oil-fed flame burns itself up. Much property is a calamity. One may live out one's days in commoner's clothes. Favor and salary are not to be trusted. Okay, and then poem 9 here, and 10 in the original. Okay, poem 9. Searingly hot this summer, now in 30 days we'll be ready to move on. Fragrant trees let their green leaves hang. Blue clouds wind off on their own. The 4 seasons change place in succession. Sun and moon take turns speeding by. I pace about in my empty hall, miserable that no one understands me. Okay, so he's an eccentric. He's the persona of the poem, whether it's Don Zhi or somebody else. Keep in mind that this is not necessarily an autobiographical poem, that there are many different ways to read, that the autobiographical mode of reading was not necessarily the most prominent mode of reading in the late Han and early Wei kingdom period. So remember that there's this distance between the poet himself and the persona, the speaker of these poems, but nevertheless, he is somebody who is not understood by the world around him. Okay, so he's kind of an eccentric, misunderstood type. I want to witness pleasure and joy to the end, and not encounter grief over separation. Poem 10. Glowing, the westward toppling sun, its lingering rays shine on my clothes. Whirling gusts blow on my walls all around. The birds huddle together against the cold. The Zhou bird still hold feathers in its beak. Okay, this is a legendary bird as it explains in the footnote below. The Chong, too, is concerned about hunger. How is it that those in office bow bent like stone chimes and forget where they're going? Why, for empty praise and fame, should one make the heart sad, worn down? Better to wing about with the shallows and wrens, and not to follow the yellow swan in its flight. The yellow swan roams over the sea-girt world. In mid-course, where is it going? Poem 11. I walked out Upper East Gate and gazed north toward Shaoyang's peak. At the foot were gentlemen picking wild beans. Above were forests of fine trees. When will a happy time occur? Stiff frost soaks my clothes. Cold winds shake the hills. Black clouds raise layers of shadow. Crying out, wild geese fly faring south. The cuckoo gives out its mournful tones. Plain substance follows from the Shang notes, miserably causing my heart pain. Gives a pain, sadness are emphasized in that poem as well. This is not a happy time for the country and for the poet himself. These are dark days here in the early part of the Wei Kingdom, Wei Dynasty. I'll give all the information and the dates for the Wei Kingdom and the three, the Sankoku Jidai and all that stuff, the Warring States period and whatnot, and in the study guide later. In the northern ward are many strange dances. By the river Pu there are languishing tones. Flighty and light-hearted, idle wanderers bob up and down at once along with the crowd. The shortcut leads along a narrow path. Just going along, they all hurry to dissipation. How can they see Qiao, the prince, who is riding the clouds over dung woods? Only techniques for prolonging my years can comfort my heart. So techniques for prolonging my years, of course, are Taoist techniques for longevity he's referring to there. Poem number 13. Deep flowing the long river's waters, above are forests of maple. Marsh eupatorium blanket the paths. Jet black steeds go off at a gallop. Gazing afar makes one sad. The spring air stirs my heart. Poem, continuing, stirs my heart. The regions of Chu had many splendid gentlemen. The clouds of dawn introduced depravity. Red blossoming gives off a sweet fragrance. At Gao Cai, they went after one another. But once there was the lament for the brown sparrow, who could forbid tears from falling? Poem 14. The hanging coach is in the southwest. Xi-he will soon sink down. Its flowing rays illuminated the sea-girt world. Then abruptly it comes to evening darkness. At dawn it glowed in Xian pool. Now Meng shore receives its splendor. How can it know of gentlemen, whether in straits or success, that once they die they will never live again? Look on the blossoms of peach and plum. Who can stay so brilliant for long? Okay. Again, the theme of impermanence. Nothing stays brilliant forever. Everything turns to darkness and eventually dies. And where is the superior man? The superior man, of course, is the Zhongzi or Kunshi in Japanese. Superior man in Confucian thought is the man of great virtue. So where is the superior man that Confucius and Mencius and so forth write about? He is surely not to be found here in our age, is what he's saying here. And where is the superior man? So this is one of the figures that he longs for, that he yearns for, that he searches for in the course of this collection of poems. I sigh that I have not gotten together with him, the Junzi. Peer up at the pines on Jing Mountain. They can comfort my feelings. Okay, so this is a world of few comforts, but among the few comforts are aspects of nature, mountains, streams, and so forth. 15. Poem 15. In the west there is a fair woman. Okay, so here's another object of his desire. Every time an object of his desire sort of enigmatic object of his desire appears, underline it. And this is one of the key ones. In the west there is a fair woman. She gleams like the rays of sun. The robes that she wears are of delicate gossamer. On either side a pair of half-circle jades hang from her waist. Her fine features shine with the beauty of form. She gives off a faint fragrance with the wind. Climbing a height, she gazes toward the one she loves. She lifts her sleeves, facing the morning sunlight. She lodges her countenance among the clouds, waving her sleeves. She wings up over the void. Wind tossed in a blur, her drifting glances turn to me. I am overjoyed, but never make contact. Talking face to face would stir pain. Okay, so she's one of the objects of his desire, but she has another lover. Nevertheless, she deigns to glance in his direction at the end of the poem, and he is much pleased by that. Continuing. 16. Fellows in their glory in bygone days, such were An Ling and Long Yang. Okay, An Ling and Long Yang appeared in the poem that we read earlier in this class, the Changhang Ge by Bai Jiaoyi. So this is the same famous city, Longyang, and An Ling, that appear often in Tang Dynasty poetry. As fresh, and of course this is this is before the Tang Dynasty. So the Changhang Ge by Bai Jiaoyi and other Tang poets, Du Fu and so forth, all come 400 years later. So Ruan is a poet who comes much before the Tang period. Keep that in mind as we read this. Fellows in their glory in bygone days, such were An Ling and Long Yang. As fresh as the blossoms of peach and plum shimmering, they gave off a glow. They were delightful like spring's 90 days. They bowed, bent like stone chimes, resembling autumn frost. Their roving glances gave off beguiling charm. Their speech and laughter emitted fragrance. Holding hands, they enjoyed equal pleasure with their lords. In the night they shared the same robe. They wished to become birds flying in pairs with their lords, wing to wing, soaring together. Their famous vows are written in the red and green. For all eternity we shall not forget each other. So this seems to be a allusion to Yang Guifei, but Yang Guifei doesn't appear till much later, so that can't be. This seems to be a sort of proto-narrative prototype for Yang Guifei and her love with her emperor, her doomed love. Poem 17, but we'll have to I'll check on that and add something in the study guide later. Poem 17. I climbed a height and looked out on the wilderness all around. I gazed north to the folds of green mountains. Cypress and pine hid the crests of the hills. Birds in flight sang crossing over. Stirred strongly, I felt a bitter, sour taste. Rancor and harm are always so terribly great. Lord Li Si was saddened at the thought of East Gate. Su Qing thought the Three Rivers region too narrow. Seeking fellow feeling, one finds fellow feeling. Why should I sigh anymore? Poem 18. Autumn's onset begins the cool air. Crickets sing by my bed curtain. Moved by these things, I feel great cares, filled with distress. It causes my heart sorrow. Much to say, but where to vent it? Fulsome phrases, but to whom to complain? A light breeze blows on gossamer sleeves. The bright moon shines with a clear glow. When the morning rooster sings high in the trees, I will order my carriage to set off and go home. Poem 19. Long ago at 14 or 15, in my aspirations, I loved the poems and documents. So he's referring to the Shijing and the Shujing, the classic of poetry and the classic of documents, which are among the four books and the 5 documents that are the canonical books of classical of Chinese antiquity. Long ago, at 14 and 15, in my aspirations, I loved the poems and the documents. Wearing coarse clothes, I harbored pearls and jade, and I planned to be classed with Yonghuai and Ming. I opened the window and looked on the wilderness around. I climbed a height and gazed toward those I longed for. Mounds and tombs covered the mountains and hills. 10,000 ages are there together in a single moment. After 1,000 or 10,000 years, where has their fame and glory gone? So again, nothing lasts forever. Then I was enlightened by Yang Menzi, wailing, I now sneer at how I was before. So regret appears there too. He regrets at how foolish he was in the past, and how he didn't learn from experience. Next poem is poem 20. I lingered about by Peng Pond, and turning I gazed back toward Liang. The green waters raised mighty waves. The broad wilderness was a vast expanse. Running animals rushed this way and that. Birds in flight winged after one another. At the time the quail fire stars were due south, and the sun and moon were exactly opposed. The north wind was sharp with bitter cold. Ying vapors sent down a faint frost. This is the yin of yin and yang, I think. We'll have to check that later. On a journey without a companion. So loneliness again is a major theme running through this. In an instant I felt misery and pain. The lesser man reckons his accomplishment. Underline lesser man. This is a xiaoreng, which is the opposite of the superior man, or the junzi. So junzi and xiaoren are antithetical ideas, Confucian concepts that appear throughout this work. The lesser man reckons his accomplishment. The superior man takes the constant as his guide. He does not regret ending up haggard and worn. Chanting, I compose this verse. Poem 21. Types of things differ in their life courses. Long-lived and short-lived are each separate ways. The langgang tree grows in high mountains. The budding zhi fungus shines in a crimson hall. Glowing, the blossoms of peach and plum have a path forming under them, soon to perish. How can people expect it to be a street or avenue, since they show but faint light in spring's third month? Not being trees to outlast the wind, they are bedraggled, nothing constant in them. So again, nothing is constant. There's a note about that. We'll confirm that later. Next poem is poem 22. The hidden eupatorium may not be strung from the waist. For whom does the crimson plant bloom? The tall bamboo stays concealed in the mountain shadow. The yegang plant looks down from layered walls. And there's a note about the yegang plant there. Let's take a sip of coffee so I don't fall asleep. Note about the lizi. Creeping vines spread in a secluded valley. Continuously melons grow on their stems. When pleasure reaches an extreme, it melts the spirit. When sorrow is deep, it wounds a person's heart. I finally realized that there is no gain from worry. Better to go off to the supreme purity. And there's no note about supreme purity, but I expect this is a Taoist concept of the supreme purity, this sort of metaphysical or otherworldly realm that he is trying to attain. This higher realm of existence, the supreme purity. 23. Yangzhu wept at the forking of roads. And there's a note about the forking of roads, famous allegory of the man who sought, well, we'll read that later. Mozi grieved at the dyeing of silk. Bowing and deferring, then long separation, whirled along, we cannot expect to be together. This is not only in tender feelings of love, indeed it happens in the living's separation from the dead. Gloomy solitude is lamented by people, yet occasions leading to disaster cannot be avoided. A girl of Zhou charmed Shang. Zhongxiang. By her softness and humility, he was deceived all the more. And scholars have done their best to identify all the allusions in this work, and a lot of that's explained in the footnotes, but that allusion at the end there is unknown. Nobody's been able to identify it thus far. Alas, those gentlemen on the path of service, how can they protect themselves? Poem 24. In my heart I cherish that inch of shadow. Shihe's sun is about to turn dark. I wave my sleeves and take hold of my long sword. Looking up, I watch the drifting clouds journey on. Among the clouds is a black crane, setting its aims high. It raises a mournful sound. In one flight it strikes the blue heavens. For generations untold it will not sing again. How could it roam about with the quail and wren, fluttering as they sport in the yard? Poem 25. Xie Ho rode his numinous carriage. Kuafu made dung woods. Life and death follow transformations. Sun and moon float up and sink down. The phoenixes sing out in the panpipes. Ling Lung produced their notes. The prince loved the pipes. In every age they have sought him. Who says he cannot be met? The bluebird understands my heart. Okay, so again, this theme of humans. Other humans do not understand him. He's very misunderstood by society and so forth. But the bluebird understands his heart, he says here. Poem 26. The turtle doves fly no further than mulberry or elm, while the seabird makes the passage to heaven's pool. Of course, they can recognize what is vast and large, but their wings are not suited to such. How can they soar in the whirlwind? Better that they roost on the branch of a tree. Below they alight in the undergrowth. Above they roam within the garden's hedge. And they are satisfied in just this way, with their young following after them. Okay, so as the note indicates here, this is the bird of the parable that opens the free wandering chapter, the first chapter of Zhuangzi, the foundational text, one of the foundational texts of Taoism. The Zhuangzi first chapter is titled Free Wandering. This is a very key word, key term in Taoism. Xiao Yao Yo, Shou Yo in Japanese, Shou Yo Yu in Japanese. Seabird will confirm that note later, but just note that it is an allusion to the first chapter of the Zhuangzi. Okay, next poem. Poem 27. When was the moment my life began? In care and misery, tears soak gowns fold. High birds soar in the mountains. Sparrows and swallows roost in the woods below. Blue clouds hide my front yard. The plain zither saddens my heart. On a lofty mountain a crane cries out. How can I go seeking it? Okay, so always wanting to seek, wanting to attain that which is unattainable. Okay, this longing for the unattainable is probably the central theme of this whole work, I would say. Poem number 28. The singing doves sport in the trees in my yard. The Jiao Ming roams among drifting clouds. How could they see that bird soaring alone, beating its wings without companions? Death is the natural course of things, yet the dissolution is so chaotic. And the Jiao Ming is a mythical bird from the western regions, resembling the phoenix, as he says in the note there. Poem 29. I walked by the crossing of a great avenue. In depression I thought on the one I love. How could I see her this morning? Yet in a blur, she is truly there. Okay, so the objects of his desire, the ones that he loves, exist only in his mind, in his mind's eye. In a blur, she is there. A tall pine growing in a bog cannot be met for myriad generations. The high birds fly brushing the heavens. They roam and sport together above the clouds. How can there be a gentleman going alone, shedding tears, saddened about bygone days? Poem 30. When the clear dew congeals into stiff frost, the flowering plants turn into withered stalks. Who says that a worthy gentleman having perfect comprehension can bear it? Riding clouds, I will hail red pine and chow the prince, inhaling, exhaling, forever and ever. So he's practicing the Taoist breath regimen, as it says here in the note. Next is poem 31. The loyal heart falls from favor and grace. Great virtue loses its due. How can words of goodness last long? Acts of kindness are not so easy to bestow. Have you not seen the swallows flying south, their wings now irregularly spread? Gaozi found the poem on Qin resentful. The lord of the three clans grieved over estrangement. Why did Mr. Undifferentiation have his body ruined by all of A and sudden? 32. 10 suns rose from Yang Valley, then steadied their pace and sped 10,000 leagues. Far in the heavens they lit the sea-girt world. Then in a flash they went under into Ming shore. Okay, the sea-girt world has appeared 3 or 4 times already. Underline that phrase and we'll look and see what it is in the original later. Sea-girt world, see if it has it here. Hui, continuing, who claims that their fiery heat lasted long? In roaming and setting, how they kept going on? Those who have passed on have not lived forever. They too have gone off to brambles and briars. 1,000 years is like but a morning, one meal, and in a while it's over. Between right and wrong or gain and loss, what use to argue with one another about the truth? Reckon the gain, and you'll know your skill's limit. Then at once you can stop feelings of sorrow. 33. To the southeast is Mount Guye. The fen's waters come forth by its southern slopes. 6 dragons are yoked to a coach of vapors. Its cloud canopy covers heaven's net. 4 or 5 of the undying roam freely, at ease in eupatorium chambers. Their rest is utterly pure and calm. Inhaling and exhaling produce dew and frost. So this again is a reference to the first chapter of Zhangzi, the Xiao Yao Yu. There's a godlike being, a Sheng Ren, who dwells on the Mount Guye. We'll confirm that note later. Continuing, they bathe in the cinnabar abyss. They gleam in the rays of sun and moon. How can I be at rest on the terrace for reaching the divine? Drifting along I go off, soaring on high. Poem 34. The course of things has an established principle. Nothing is constant in the way of life and death. From the canny and clever 10,000 devices emerge, yet this great essential does not alter direction. The great essential, in capital letters here, underline it. This is sort of a guiding principle of the work and of the poet's life. How is it that unctuous toadies give stern looks, feeling so arrogant? So there's some critique of the political elite here, I think, in this passage. They ride fine coaches and drive good horses, or lean on their armrests, facing fatty foods and fine grain. They clothe themselves in robes of delicate gossamer. In a deep-set kiosks, they have a room set aside for idle pleasures. Do they not see the blooms by evening, how they flutter, falling by the roadside? Poem 35. Great cares knot up my sense of purpose. I am anxious and worried, as if ever in alarm. Okay, so anxiety, worry, being excessively worried about this and that is sort of the main mood that runs through this work. I am anxious and worried, as if ever in alarm. My free roaming had not come to an end when the crimson glow suddenly sank westward. Okay, free roaming is something that the Taoist does when he leaves the Confucian society and goes to roam on his own, pursuing whatever whims he has. There are crickets at the door and window. Hui gu, cicadas sing out in the yard. My heart has not yet found someone I love. Who can understand what I feel? I wish I were a bird in the clouds, singing out mournfully every 1,000 leagues. The threefold fungus extends over Ying Zhou. By far roaming, I can live forever. Okay, so the ultimate ideal or ultimate purpose that he finds in life, or in ideal life, is this idea of roaming. And obviously, birds are able to roam the earth more freely than humans, so he longs to be a bird and fly far away here, in a kind of Keatsian ode in that poem. Poem number 36. Boastful talk vents pent-up troubles. To be lazy and indolent irritates the heart. To the northwest I climb Mount Buzhou and gaze to Dung Woods to the southeast. Broad wilderness spreads throughout the 9 regions. Lofty mountains upraise their high peaks. In the time of a meal I pass myriad generations. In 1,000 years things sink and rise again. Who claims that jade and mere stone are the same? Tears fall and I cannot prevent them. Okay, so the passage of time is here emphasized in this poem, and eternity and the instant are kind of wedded together in that poem as well. Poem 37. Everyone says that they wish to live longer, but if they live longer, where will they go? The yellow swan cries out, Ziyang, 1,000 autumns cannot be hoped for. I sit alone among the cliffs, in deep despair, thinking of the one I yearn for. So this image of the poet drinking wine, sitting among the cliffs alone, is a very sort of paradigmatic image that is of the 7 poets of the Bamboo Grove. Whenever you see visual depictions of these poets, they're often among the cliffs here, as is depicted in these 2 lines. And what did the prince love? With tender affection he held another's hand, so pleasing even to now, but dispute can occur in a moment. Set aside things you would do tomorrow. By this evening you will find yourself deceived. Poem 38. I draw my sword and look down on the bare blade. How can that strike and wound you? I dread only that those good at words will speak of me beside 3 rivers. The waterfall flows off Jade Mountain. The hanging coach perches on Fusang. Sun and moon cut straight across 1,000 leagues. The pale autumn wind brings a faint frost. Success and failure occur on the paths of power. I sigh. How can one last long there? Poem 39. Of high degree or low is as heaven ordains. Desperate straits and success each has its time. Languidly charming are the wicked. They will deceive you according to their advantage, betraying kindness or demurring at the bestowal of grace. Such acts will only be mocked by slanderers. The wagtails sing in the clouds and keep flying without any plan to meet. How would they know that the crooked man would suddenly one day not be able to hold out? Poem 40. Blasting winds shake the wilderness all around. Whirling clouds shadow the stair to the hall. For whom has the bed curtain been hung? For whom will armrest and staff lend support? Even if you are no wise gentleman, how can you not know of the mulberry and elm? There are in our age those deaf and with eyesight failing. In the vast blue, where will they go? Beating wings, I fly along with the wind. I leave my old dwelling far off behind. Winding away to the foot of Jade Mountain, I leave behind both calumny and praise. Poem 41. At dawn I climbed to the top of a mighty slope. As evening fell, I gazed on the western mountains. Briars blanket the wild plain. Flocks of birds fly beating their wings. The Liang, phoenix, roosts apart for the night. It is following the dictates of its nature. And the last line, of course, is the sort of central dictum of Taoism, to follow the dictates of one's nature. The animals do it, the birds do it, why can't humans do it? It's sort of the central question of Taoism, of Zhuangzi, of Lao Tzu, and so forth. Next is continuing. Who can draw near to the Jian tree? The Yegang is also charming and lovely. Have you not seen the kudzu in the woods, spreading out, but all connected together? Kudzu, of course, is the English word. I think it's from the Japanese word. Kudzu came into English from Japanese, if I'm not mistaken. Next poem, 42. My towering cap touches the drifting clouds. Ukigumo in Japanese, right? Chinese pronunciation, we'll have to look at that later. Uki, fu, ung, or something like that. My long sword sticks forth beneath the heavens. Minor issues are not worth concern. Passing on high, I stride across the whole age. Feizi is my carriage driver. Feizi, of course, is the legalist scholar, right? Feizi. No footnote for Feizi, but I think that's who he is. Feizi is my carriage driver. Free and easy, I roam at the wilderness's edge. Looking back, I take leave of the Queen Mother. From this point on, I will go off. How can I join the gentlemen in a thatched house, plucking a zither and reciting mutual pledges? (43) Zhou and Shang are the world's crossroads. Their roads connect the three rivers provinces. Seductive are the charming and fulsome girls. They glow in such full bloom. Black hair illuminates rosy complexions. There is a sparkling in sidelong glances. I yearn for one look from such a city toppler. So again, a city toppler is a beauty, a female beauty who's so beautiful that she topples cities. I would boast of her longing gaze. I wish to rove with her all spring long, but the dawn sunlight will suddenly slip away. So again, time will pass and end their love affair, even if they do, even if he were able to initiate a love affair with this woman. Ruin follows splendor in an instant, and how would separation be? So nothing lasts forever. Separation would be so painful that it might make the whole thing all for naught, is what he's implying there at the end. So it's not even worth the trouble, I think he's suggesting. Poem 44. There once was a householder by the river, a weaver of artemisia fiber, who cast a fine pearl away. He liked his food of pigweed and wild beans. He took pleasure in his thatched cottage. He would never ape those following who go in a crowd, whose fine horses draw light coaches at a gallop. So this story too is referring to the story Liu Ko, the chapter titled Liu Ko from the Zhuangzi. And there's a note about that, we'll read that later, about the boy who does not follow the crowds. So this individualism sort of runs through both Zhuangzi and this work. Keep that in mind as we read it. These are not people who follow the crowds and the latest trends and so forth. They go their own way. Individualism is very central to Taoist thought. At dawn they are born beside the highway. At dusk they are buried at the crossroads corner. Before their laughter and pleasure are done, in an instant they are heaving sighs. I take a lesson from those whose whims keep changing. From that point on, my pent-up cares relax. From that point on, my pent-up cares relax. 45. The scholar is versed in the 6 classics. His sense of purpose is fixed. It may not be opposed. He will not make any motion contrary to rights. Rights, the Confucian rights, of course, with the. He won't speak if not according to the rules of propriety. Thirsty, he drinks from the clear stream's current. Hungry, he eats 1 tray of food for 2 days. He has nothing with which to make seasonal offerings. His clothing always leaves him suffering from the cold. He slippers away, he chants southern wind. In a hemp-padded gown he mocks splendid coaches. Trusting in the way, he holds to the poems and the documents. Again, the 4 books and the 5 documents. It's a reference to these 2 works that are part of that, those 4 books, 5 documents. His sense of right may keep him from accepting a single meal. Fierce are his phrases of censure and praise. For such as him, Lao Tzu gave a long sigh. Okay, so Lao Tzu is looking over in this final line this image of the Confucian scholar. We'll have to parse the meaning of that poem later. Poem 46. I sat alone in the empty hall. Who would join me in pleasure? I went out the gate and looked out on the long road and saw no carriages or horses passing. I climbed a height and gazed at the 9 regions. I made out a broad wilderness stretching on and on. A lone bird flew to the northwest. A stray animal came down to the southeast. At sunset I thought on friends and kin. By talking face to face I would express myself. Poem 47. In my younger years I studied swordsmanship. My fine skills surpassed the Count of Cheng. My splendid manner split rainbows, and I had rare renown, surpassing all in that age. I wielded my sword, looking out on the desert, and watered my horse in remote regions all around. How our flags flapped in the breeze, and one heard only the sound of chimes and drums. Okay, note that is, the speaker in that poem is probably a fictional persona or a historical persona, somebody famous from the past, whom the readers would immediately recognize. Note that is not, and it should not be read in the autobiographical mode. Yet army campaigns make a person sad, and feelings of sorrow blaze within. When I considered how I had spent my life, bitter regret arose from that moment on. So again, this theme of regret that runs throughout this work. Poem 48. The blazing light extends over thousands of leagues. The mighty river sweeps through swirls and rapids. My bent bow is hung from the fusang tree. My long sword rests beyond the horizon. Mount Tai is my whetstone. The yellow river is the sash of my gown. I turn to consider Master Zhou. Zhou, of course, is Zhuangzi, the author of Zhuangzi, the foundational Taoist text. I turn to consider Master Zhou. Neither flourishing nor withering could be trusted. His body perished and was left in the wilds, where ravens and kites worked its harm. How can he equal the manly warrior whose deeds and fame become great thereby? There's a note about Zhuangzi's encounter that is being alluded to in that poem. Poem 49. When the sun was high, I straightened my cap and clothes, looking forward to meeting visitors and guests. But who are those visitors and guests? They are as fleeting as the blowing dust. Cloud vapors are strung from their waists. Their discourse delves into the spirits and gods. In an instant they abandon me. When again shall I meet such men as these? Poem 50. Much brooding dissipates one's sense of purpose. Lonely silence makes the heart worry. Roaming about, I view lake and marsh. Clasping a sword, I mount a light boat. I wish only to be forever at ease. In later years I will roam here again. Poem 51. At dawn I went out Upper East Gate. At dawn I went out Upper East Gate and gazed on the foot of Mount Shaoyang. Afar, the pines and cypresses were thick and dark, and orioles joined together in sporting. I roamed freely among the 9 bends, then hesitated. Where might I go? Brooding on how it used to be, my feelings swell, thinking of the enchantress. Okay, there's a note there about the enchantress, who exactly is. The identification of the enchantress here is a matter of pure speculation, he notes in the footnote. Poem 52. The prince at 15 years, wandered at leisure on the shores of the Li in Luo. His ruddy complexion flourished like spring blooming. Clever at argument, he cherished the pure and genuine. How could he meet Master Hill adrift? Raising his hand in farewell to the people of his day. Swept lightly along, he easily became a blur, and wind-tossed he left his body behind. Flying on, he sang and soared. Beating wings, he felt sharp bitterness. Poem 53. How full of feeling is the bold warrior! His aims are to overawe the wilds in all directions. He drives his carriage on far campaign, receiving his orders, he broods on forgetting concern for self. Of fine bows he carries raven screech. His bright armor gives off sparkling light. In danger he takes no heed for his life. The body dies, the soul soars aloft. How could he be one of those gentlemen who stays unharmed? He sacrifices his life on the battlefield. His loyalty will be glorious for 100 generations. His sense of right makes his good name famous. His reputation will be passed down to later generations. His spirit and principles truly are constant. Poem 54. One may not go forth from the gate of the pass. How can one go sail on the sea's waters? There's a reference to, the first part is a reference to Lao Tzu, the second part is a reference to Confucius's Analects. How can one go sail on those seas' waters? In the light of the red sun, I do not see them. Darkness, vision failing, alone without a target. Taking melon in hand, I think on the count of Dongling. The brown sparrow truly makes me feel singular shame. Powers lost can occur in an instant. Wearing their swords, they ascend my mound. I lament that fellow in the mulberry grove. Tears fall, streaming crisscross. I will borrow a carriage around the Jiang and Wei, and with saddled horse go off roaming. Poem 55. Grand scholars depend on rules and measures. They are norms of correctness in the clothes they wear. The exalted and humble are positioned in order. In all matters they match the governing standard. Adorned in finery, they compose their countenance. They bow, bent like stone chimes, holding plaques of jade. In the great hall they set out plain water, while fine grain abounds in their inner chambers. In public they discourse on purity and simplicity. In their homes they obliterate all that is sweet. They say what they please within, but then outwardly speak of the right and rules. So obsequious in their standard of ritual moves, their manner makes my heart soar. Poem 56. The Zhou tree shines on the western sea. Fusang shades Yin Zhao from sight. Sun and moon pass on their tracks through heaven. The light and the dark are not matched together. There are constants in failure and success. What can one seek amid losses and gains? How can one emulate those youths on the road who jaunt about hand in hand? There are transformations of yin and yang. Who can sink and not also float up? The red turtle leaps up in the waterfall and flies past Wuzhou by night. In an instant it speeds over heaven and earth. It brushes the currents of the encircling seas twice round. Tied by bonds to the realm of profit and gain, nag and steed share the same shaft pole. Better to leave behind sight and hearing, to rise up afar, escaping great cares. Poem 57. To the north I looked down into Qianmei Valley. Going west I visited Xiaoreng. I turned to gaze on heaven's ford from afar. Such joyous free movements make my heart happy. Sensually beguiling is the gate of life and death. I visit it once and seek it no more. Perhaps I will encounter the dawn wind hawk and fly forth on it from the southern woods. In the vast flood of crystalline light I speed on in wild abandon. Then I stop to rest at ease in the pure citadel. Who can forbid me from acting or relaxing there? And the pure citadel is the dwelling place of the high God in heaven, it says here in the note. Poem 58. Once I visited Liang and climbed to the steep edge of Huanghua Peak. Gong Gong resides in the mysterious darkness. His high terrace reaches the blue heavens. The remote barrens stretch on and on into the distance. In depression, I think on the one I cherish. Who is the one I cherish? One who scrutinizes clearly, responding to natural process. The winged dragon was sinking under at Zhou, and the drought goddess could not get to sleep. Reveling in excess, flaunting the customs of the times, how can such bring extension of one's years? Poem 59. I drove my carriage out the gate, planning to travel afar. Where was I going in my travels? I was turning my back on boasting and renown. Boasting and renown are not within me. I wish only to suit what I feel within. So this Taoist message here again. Not seeking honor and fame and all those social virtues, but rather seeking to follow the dictates of one's own heart and one's own whims and pleasures and so forth. It's a very Taoist concern, Taoist idea. I wish only to suit what I feel within. A single ply curtain blocks the shining sun. A single ply curtain blocks the shining sun. A high pavilion cuts off faint sounds. Malicious words cause associates to become estranged. Drifting clouds make broad daylight dark. With languid charms she shared my robes. One look could bring down a city. But such dalliance is only for a moment. Rich flowering will bloom not a second time. Dawn turns again to twilight suddenly, and I see not the shape of the one I enjoy. The yellow bird flies southeast. I send farewells to my friends by it. Poem 60. Hitching my team, I set out from Wei's capital, namely Daliang is Wei's capital. The warring state's kingdom of Wei, also known as Liang, is the direct reference here, but it may also refer to the Wei Dynasty. Remember the short-lived dynasty that we're currently in, that Liang lived in most of his life. Hitching my team out, I set out for Wei's capital, namely Daliang. Heading south, I gazed on the Ping Terrace. There are the remaining tones of flutes and pipes, but where now is the king of Liang? And as the note says, this clearly echoes a famous passage by the Western Han writer Zhou Yang in his biography in the Shi. And there's a quote, I won't quote the whole thing. Continuing the poem, his soldiers fed on the dregs and bran. Goodly men were lodged in the weeds. But before the songs and dances were done, the troops of Qing had already come back. Jia woods is no longer ours. Dust rises in vermilion palaces. The army was defeated by Hua's south slope. His body at last was dust and ash. Poem 61. Everyone knows how easy it is to form associations, but to make true friends is hard indeed. A perilous course, which with much doubt and suspicion. One may not with a bright pearl accost someone. The others may seek to dine on the Tai Lao feast, but I want to be satisfied with a simple dinner. The harms and benefits beget dislike and rancor. Alas, too bad! What more can I say? This is a reference to the Confucius's Analects, to the passage where he speaks of the 3 potential benefits and 3 potential harms from friends. Okay, so note that this work does not only refer to the Taoist tradition, the Taoist texts and Taoist ideas and so forth, but it's also very much grounded in Confucian ideas, and there are plenty of Confucian references in the work as well. Poem 62 now. Dawn light does not reach fullness a second time. The bright sun suddenly hides away in the west. It leaves this place as if in the nod of a head. How is it that it's already autumn's end? Human life is like dust and dew. Heaven's way goes on and on forever. When Duke Qing of Qi climbed that mountain, his tears flowed down in abundance. The sage Confucius stood by the long river and regretted things passing on, suddenly as if adrift. I will never reach those who are gone, and I will not stay for those to come. I wish I could climb Mount Taihua and roam above with red pine. The fisherman understands the world's ills, riding on the current in his light boat. Red pine is an immortal, and there's the fisherman. Okay, Duke Qing climbed the mountain. There's a note there about Duke Qing. Continuing, moving on. We're almost done. 20 more poems, 18 more poems. Poem 63. A morning and then an evening, then a dawn again. My complexion changes from what it was. My spirit melts away into ruin. In my breast I hold boiling water and fire. Transformations constantly instigate one another. The thousands of things that happen are endless. Our knowledge and plans are woefully inadequate. I fear only that in an instant my soul will be whirled away in the wind. To the end of my days I tread on thin ice. Who know how my heart is scorched? Poem 64. A morning, and then another dawn, a dusk, and then another daybreak. My complexion changes from what it was. My spirit whirls and is swallowed up. Looking down into my cup, much misery, thinking of friends in former times. Facing the ale, I cannot speak. Depressed, I feel a sour pain. I wish I could plow the sunlit side of the eastern wetlands, but who would join me in preserving genuineness? Sorrow and bitterness occur in the same moment. Noble actions bring harm to my poor body. What does it matter whether coiled up or extending? Dragon and serpent will be my neighbor. So this poem, we see the unification of, or the conflation of series of dichotomous opposites here going on, is what is going on in that poem, I think. Let's see what the footnote says about it. The dragon coils up and hides to preserve itself and extends itself when it is timely. This is a standard. Okay, won't worry about that. We'll look into that later. Poem 65. Whoever has sorrow has feelings. Sorrow's absence is likewise absence of longing. Okay, so again, the point that is being made that opposites are often two sides of the same coin, and you can't have sorrow without longing, you can't have longing without sorrow, you can't have sadness without happiness, you can't have happiness without sadness, and so forth. So it continuing the logic that we saw in the previous poem. So long as we are not caught up in a net, why need one have a region of 10,000 leagues? The whirlwind brushes the upper tiers of cloud. Auspicious vapors invite that which burns them away. When the heart, turned to ash, lodges in a withered dwelling, why should we look back to the charms of the human realm? But I have just discovered the difficulties of forgetting self. How can I understand silent self-abandonment? Poem 66. The hibiscus, Fuyong in Chinese. Remember that the hibiscus, the fuyo, in Japanese pronunciation, appeared in Kajin, Ishikawa's work. He might have taken the image from poem 66 of this work, of this collection. The hibiscus blooms on tomb mounds. Such a splendid brilliance they have. But when the bright sun sinks into the forest, they flutter and fall by the road. The cricket hums at the door and window. The huigu cicada sings in the thorns. The mayfly sports for but 3 days. Swarming, they ply brightly colored wings. For whom do they make show of their attire? In an instant they put it away. How long does their faded span last, that with brave abandon each does his utmost? Poem 67. On the long road speed grand carriages. The lengthy river carries light boats. This is not the natural course of human life. It is something that follows from the path to power. Great fame befuddles one's sense of purpose. So again, this critique of society here, Taoist critique of worldly concerns, worldly gains, and so forth. Great fame befuddles one's sense of purpose. Rich gain causes worries to the heart. Dearest friends harbor discontent. One's own flesh and blood turn to enemies. Okay, world renunciation is explicitly expressed here in this poem. I hope to destroy pearls and jade, and thereby rise to free roaming. Free roaming, again, underline that phrase. That's, yes. Poem 68. On the great highway is a wondrous man. Yellowish steeds pull his wagon. At dawn he rises in the wilds of Zhou. At sunset he stays at bright light. He tours places beyond the encircling seas again and again. His wings carry him flying upward. He abandons all matters of the world. They are not worth troubling one's inner self. Once he goes, he is gone forever. After 1,000 years, one gazes for him still. Poem 69. The primal mix generated the paired norms. The paired norms are, as it says in the footnote here, yin and yang, earth and heaven. The primal mix generated the paired norms. The 4 images set in motion the celestial sphere. The 4 images here, metal, wood, water, and fire. The celestial sphere is an armillary sphere that shows the motions of the heavenly bodies. An imperial armillary sphere used for astrological modeling, it says there in the note. Okay, so the 4 images set in motion the celestial sphere. The gleaming sun spreads its blazing essence. The pale moon lets fall its glow. Let fall its glow. Let's fall its glow. The measures of light show the orbits of brightness, and alas, man's life is a minor thing. It is whirled like dust blown away in the wind. It goes suddenly, like auspicious clouds evaporating in sunlight. So the impermanence, the evanescence of life is the theme of this poem. Long years suit my wishes. Glorious favor does not overawe me. Anqi, paced along paths in the heavens. Red pine, the immortal, strayed away from the world. How can I get wings to mount over high wisps, to toss in the wind up over cliffs in cloud? And how sad, Confucius's sense of purpose. Why would he want to lodge among the 9 barbarians? The 9 barbarians. Confucius famously remarked that he would like to live among the 9 non-Han peoples, or barbarians as he called them. When someone questioned how he could bear such uncivilized folk, he answered that if a sage were among them, they would not be uncivilized. Pretty good answer. And for the net, poem number 70. The net of heaven extends over wilderness-girt world. This refers to, and the note says this is an allusion to the Lao Tzu. The net of heaven is vast, its meshes are wide, yet they lose nothing. Poem 70, we'll start again. The net of heaven extends over wilderness-girt world. A net of wings, a set of wings, folded and unspread. A tangled mass of travelers moving, floating along like wild ducks. Life has no measured span. The unforeseen can happen from dawn to dusk. The undying have halted their long years. They nourish their purposes in still void. Wind whirled between clouds and sun, they are remote and distinct from the paths of the world. Glorious fame is not what they prize. The senses' pleasures give them no delight. They picked herbs and never turned back, but accounts of immortals do not tally up. Pressed by this, I am truly unsure. It causes me to hesitate long. Poem 71. The royal enterprise needs good helpers. He depends on heroes to do great deeds. The chiefs and the gentles, hail and fair. Glorious is the sound of praise hymns to the many officers. And the note says the 8 chiefs and 8 gentles were the talented helpers of the sage kings Gao Xing and Gao Yang respectively. Here they are a figure for royal ministers, and the many officers refers to the courtiers of Zhou. Fair, glorious is the sound of praise hymns to the many officers. Yet sometimes yin and yang miscarry. Sun and moon do not always cast a glow. Heaven's moments have both fair fortune and foul. Human affairs often prosper and fail. Dong Yuan Gong and Qi Li Zhi fled to the southern hills. Bo Yang hid among the western Rong tribes. Preserving their bodies, they thought on the genuine way. How can favor and glory deserve esteem? And there's a note here that says this last figure referred to in that last line, Bo Yang, is in fact Lao Tzu. Bo Yang is another name for Lao Tzu, the foundational figure of Taoism. Who among men does not start off well? But few are able to carry on to the end. Excellent were those men of ancient times. They leave a pure influence for myriad years. Poem 72, and then we'll take a little break after this one. What a tangled mess are tasks of this world. Man's way allows no respite at all. The years of my prime have passed on with their time. Dawn's dew, awaiting the sun. I wish I could take hold of Shihe's reins. Let the bright sun not move its light. The road is cut off to heaven's stair. The river of stars is remote, no bridge across. I would wash my hair on Yang Valley's banks, then travel afar to the edge of Kunlun. I would climb those great hills of the undying and pick their blooms of autumn eupatorium. The roads of these days are not worth the struggle. One may soar aloft to the supreme ultimate. The Kunlun Mountains of the Immortals in the far west is that reference there. Poem 73. We'll take a break before we read this, before I passed out. Okay, 9 more poems to go. Let's get through this. Poem 73. Ah, the gentlemen of high antiquity, tranquil and plain, their purpose was to be at rest in poverty. But in these final days, the way has sunk into decay, with furious galloping and billowing dirt and dust. Master Ning's chant was certainly not improper, but who is willing to surrender to death as in Yang's song? Those who are constantly busy are not my type. Those who are always anxious are not my ilk. Glory and shame occur in a breath. I will go off to savor the way's genuineness. In truth, the way's genuineness may give delight. The clear and pure preserves the essential spirit. Chaofu and Xu You showed high principles. From here I will go to the river's banks. Poem 74. East of Daliang, there is a flowering plant. It blooms repeatedly in but a single dawn. Its countenance is lovely with an alluring charm. Its splendor casts the glow of a city toppler. Again, the image of the city toppler. A woman who is so beautiful that she topples cities. This is no wise and enlightened man. In his seductive witchery, fawning flattery appears. His flightiness is only of one moment. How can he know fame for 100 generations? The wispy beauty at road's end fears only that sun and moon will sink away. How can he see the mysterious numinous tree? On and on, at least without form. And the mysterious numinous tree is a legendary tree that goes through one seasonal cycle every 2,000 years. Poem 75. How can one learn to unhitch one's carriage? By the roadside, Dong Ye Bi is exhausted. So the driver, Dong Yi Bi, who is praised by the Duke Ding of Lu in work in Confucius's Analects, I think. Don't need to worry about that. When the line goes deep, the fish dives down further into the abyss. When the stringed arrow is set, the birds wing higher, drifting along, riding a light boat on a vast flood where nothing can be seen. Who is benefited from blowing moistening breath? Abandon and forget one another on rivers and lakes. Hard to put on a charming and seductive countenance. Perfecting a proper demeanor is my constant principle. Increasing years can be found in red pine and Chow the Prince. In a hazy blur, truly they have no end. And the note here about Red Prince says, yes, immortals, we already know that. Red Pine and Chow the Prince are two immortals. Truly they have no end. Poem number 76. In but a breath we approach old age. Laboring away, we constantly suffer from worries. Looking out on a river, one admires mighty waves. What was the same in the beginning developed into different channels. Our 100-year span is not worth mentioning. We only suffer from anger and enmity. Who are those who show anger and enmity? Eyes and ears put each other to shame. Sounds and visual sense are as far apart as Yue and Turkestan. Human passions harry us. I hail that man who comprehends the mystery. Let us go here and there and return to carefree roaming. Okay, comprehends the mystery. I should have mentioned at the very beginning that Ruan was a devotee of arcane studies. And we'll talk about what arcane studies are. Xuan Shui, I think is the Chinese reading for that. Gengaku, written in Japanese. Kuroi, the other kanji for kuroi. Gaku. We'll talk about what arcane studies are and what they meant in the 3rd century in the next video, in the study guide and so forth. Let us go there, here and there, and return to carefree roaming. Again, this term carefree roaming, yo, shouyoyu in Japanese reading of that term. The Zhangzi is referred to here. It gives a story of fish left on dry land, moistening one another with breath and bubbles, and states that they would be better off forgetting each other in the rivers and lakes. Okay, moving on. We're almost finished here. Poem 77. Long ago, a divine immortal lived right in the folds of Mount Guya. He rode clouds and drove flying dragons. He breathed in and out, nibbling alabaster flowers. One may hear of him, but not meet him. With strong feeling I heave great sighs. I feel pain that I am not of his kind. Sorrow and bitterness come upon me. Study the world below and grasp what is above. Time fleets by, and what can I do? And the two notes there. This is the last quotation there is he's quoting Confucius in Analects. I study what lies below and come to grasp what is above. The one who understands me is heaven. It's from Analects chapter 14, passage 30, section 37. Poem 78. In the woods there is a wondrous bird. It says that it is the phoenix. In clear dawn it drinks from sweet springs. At sunset it roosts on the hill. Its loud cries penetrate all the 9 regions. It stretches its neck to gaze on the 8 wilds. It happens to meet the rising autumn wind, and its wings are struck with pain. And once it goes off west of the Kunlun Mountains, when will it fly back again? It resents only being in the wrong place. The misery makes the heart feel wounded. Okay, next we have poem 79, which is poem 80 in the other edition of this collection. And this is the poem that Ishika Jun cited in his debut work, Kajin, which I translate as the fair one. Poem 79. I go out the gate and gaze for the fair one. The word in Japanese is kajing. In Chinese reading of that word, it is jiareng. I go out the gate and gaze for the jiareng. But how could the jiaren be here? On the 3 mountains I would hail red pine and chow the prince, the immortals, but in myriad generations, who could meet them? Some lives are long and some are short, overwhelmed with feeling. How can one know which it will be? Fleeting on, the dawn sun sinks down. On and on, where will I go? Have you not seen the plants at autumn's end? Their ruin is right now. Poem 80. Long ago there were gods and immortals, masters Yameng, Red Pine, and Qiao. Billowing among the 9-fold light, they mounted far on high, nibbling the clouds. Human life finds delight in living long. 100 years are considered remote. The bright sun plummets into Yu Valley. Once its evening comes, it will dawn no more. Better to abandon the world's affairs, to ascend to brightness and toss with the wind. Poem 81, the penultimate poem. Swans fly after one another. They fly after one another to the far edge of the wilds. Paired wings pass up over steady winds. And in an instant they have gone thousands of miles. At dawn they feed on the fruit of the langgang tree. Evenings they stay the night at the edge of Cinnabar Mountain. They give themselves to the blue clouds. No one can master them with a net. How could they join the gentlemen of a locale, holding hands and declaring vows? And the final poem. That which gleams before the graves, the hibiscus, with crimson blooming aglow. Its fine flowering does not last the morning. Continuous gusts make its blooms fall. Better the plants on the western mountains, the langgang tree and the cinnabar grain. They cast shadows down from layered walls. Their surplus of light makes the 9 slopes shine. How can there be no young man heaving a sigh as the sun goes down? Okay, so again, the Kunlun Mountains are referred there. This is the world of the immortals, the Kunlun Mountains. Remember that. Okay, so that's the end of the pentasyllabic poems. And then after those 82 poems, there's another section of this work. Some say that this next section was written by a different poet. Others say that it's Ruan. I'm not going to get into that, and I'm not going to read it here, but just note that there are several more 4-syllable poems here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of those, but I'm not going to read those now. Alright, that's the end of this work. And there's a lot, it's very dense stuff with lots of footnotes and annotations and allusions that we have to confirm later. So we'll go over all of that stuff in the study guide and in the next video. That's the end of this recitation video. If you have any questions, send me an email. Goodbye.